we have to understand between the avoidant and the anxious, like between the two people, we have to recognize, okay, what is our part that we need to play individually? And that's the biggest element of truth, because where we are coming from can ultimately help and can ultimately provide more space for the other person, whether you're an avoidant or an anxious. So for an anxious person, I would encourage you, if you're in that situation, to lean back a little, to allow the other individual to feel safer to approach you with their vulnerability, for them to possibly tell you what maybe they like to eat instead of peanuts. Now, that means taking less space. That means, more importantly, holding more space for ourselves. That's the true solution. This is how it all comes internally, is the more internal security we feel, the less space, the less vulnerability we feel we need to throw on and like to take up in front there. And so by us like holding more space for ourselves, we recognize that we now become better listeners. We're now allowing the avoidant to come out of their shell a little bit. We're allowing them to express what it is that's really hurting them. And ultimately, isn't that the goal? For us to really understand what it is that's hurting both of us? Because we very readily feel like we can express it, but we want to know what's also hurting them. So if you think of now about the avoidant, in that same scenario, where if you have the space to speak out, if you have the space to express yourself, if you have the ability to step into vulnerability, you must recognize that as an opportunity for growth and not for dysfunction. And that is very difficult, however, because, you know, when we step in with that little bit of vulnerability and we see it's not going our way, immediately, remember I said the 1 foot is out the door, immediately you're like, oh no, I got to get up and I got to get out of there. Very often I've expressed that, and I've done it myself in my past, where if I'm feeling really insecure about something, like even about a relationship, so the avoidant will think at this point, like, oh my God, I don't really know if this person is the best person for me, because they're already making up stories in their head, for example. So they'll say, I don't know if this person is the best person for me. I don't really know if this situation is the best for me. And so what they will do is, by the concept of self-sabotage, they themselves will also start to find little things about the relationship that don't actually work out for them. They'll start to find little things about the relationship that actually, their ego says, oh, this is not going to work out for you in the long run. This is not going to, help you here. She's becoming really overbearing. He's talking way too much and being really emotional. And so that 1 foot stays out the door. But the growth, if we continued with that, it'll just continue the pattern. And so the growth instead lies in stepping into being vulnerable, into speaking up to the anxious and saying, hey, I recognize how you're feeling and I recognize what you're going through at this point. And I want you to take this minute to hold space for what I'm feeling right now. Now, that is not something an avoidant would normally say. So it's important in that moment for the anxious to recognize that this is something that's now becoming an issue of, or now becoming a moment of holding space. And if the anxious is able to hold more space, it's not a guarantee, but the chances are that the avoidant will feel safer to step out and to actually say something. And then they may say very little at the start because they're getting new to this, vulnerability thing. And so they may say just very little at the start and say, yeah, I don't know how to really express it, but I'm just feeling bad right now. I don't really know what's causing it. I don't know how to really work through it, but this is just what I'm feeling. Then in that case, again, it's up to the dynamic, and it's up to how the anxious can now slowly ask more questions, encourage them, but to recognize that their emotions and their feelings are valid. One of the biggest issues that I come across in working with couples or working with people who are the anxious and avoidant in communication is that there is that big cross point at the center where one person's over expressing their feelings, and so the other person feels like they don't have space, and then the other person is feeling like they don't can't find the energy to be able to want to hold space for this person and share. And so they start blaming each other, where one person will say you don't even have the space or time to be able to listen to how I'm really feeling. And both of them ultimately feel that way. And so the avoidant will just shut up at that point then, because that's the only thing they know that's worked. In their childhood as well, it's always been they go to their room, they lock themselves up, they obsess about a hobby or work or travel or something else that takes them away from the emotional connection. and they further just lock up and clam up in their shell. And so if you have that opportunity for confrontation, if you have that opportunity for discussion, don't always fear it. Use it, because that challenges the opportunity for you to really establish, like, what could this relationship become? And not just that, who could I become in this moment in this relationship? And so if you're in the anxious side, perhaps it's an opportunity for you to recognize that that person has feelings too, and maybe I can sit back and maybe I can hold space for them. And if you're the avoidant, maybe it's for you to recognize that expressing your feelings doesn't always end with rejection. It doesn't always end with someone like shaming you, rejecting you, or bringing you back to your childhood wound. And the only way you can disconfirm that childhood wound is actually by intentionally practicing the opposite of what the wound was. So if my wound was like a fear of rejection and a fear of, abandonment, then I can only truly like practice creating internal security for myself, making myself feel more valid, making myself feel more safe. So then ultimately the decisions I make in the present are very different. So for the avoidant person in that space, for them to recognize that vulnerability was shamed for me, the best thing for them is to step into that discomfort and to say, okay, this person is now, this anxious person that I'm with is actually creating space for me. This didn't really happen in my life before, but they're making space for me. They're holding space for me. They're asking me to come out. I want to take a chance and to step out. Now, again, just to let you know that the first time will never be the best time, because the first time is always new, right? It's new for the avoidant to take space. It's new for the anxious to perhaps hold back from space. And so the first time it may seem a bit like, you're faking it till you make it type of thing. It may seem a little bit like it's constructed, may seem a little bit like it's, like not truly what you have thought was emotional before, but it is progress. And that is how we learn. And that's how we relearn our neural pathways of acting out. That's how we relearn our coping mechanisms. So if I try to reach out to you, let's say I'm an avoidant, I try to reach out to you and I try to take a little bit of space and I actually feel safe, that's now me telling myself that, okay, I'm going to try again because it does feel safe. And if each time I feel safer and safer to consume that space, I now feel safer and safer to be in that space. And the same on the other end is that if the anxious person now feels like, okay, I'm holding back, but this person means that they want to come forward. So it's kind of like, if I'm staying back and I'm recognizing that this person is making the effort to come forward with their emotions, with their expression, with like everything else to come this way, then it means that I don't always have to chase. It means that I don't always have to extend myself, and that I don't always have to like put my heart on the line and like and think that it's always going to be broken.